I wish we did. There's.
No, it's just dash.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I think this is lecture 13 now.
This class is there. No, I'm kidding.
This class is dead. Don't worry. For everyone who's still here, if you have feedback for us and you haven't filled out the feedback form yet, we would very much appreciate you filling that out.
There's extra credit points for.
There's no extra credit points for that. There's no extra credit points for the feedback form, but I would like you to fill that out. Because it's anonymous. It's completely anonymous.
Oh,
we don't know who's filled it out, and we don't know what you've put in. So please do that by tonight. Homework 4 is due Sunday, yes.
Is the feedback form in range?
If you somehow manage to break Google's Google Forms, that would be very impressive, and we have nothing to do with that. But yes, not in scope. Homework 4 is due this Sunday.
Office hours is.
Office hours is still right after this class for an hour. Akil's is tomorrow's 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and Jason's is Fridays 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Mine is right here. Akil's is in Kemper Lobby, and Jason is in Boehner 2071 or whatever. I don't know. 2071. Okay.
2071.
Okay. So those are the office hours. They've been posted on Canvas. They happen every single week.
We're also on Discord. If you want to join office hours or can't make it in person, just ping us on Discord. We're also on Discord like 23/7. So you just ping us if you have any questions.
All right. That's the announcements done. And we'll move forward to this thing. Hopefully this is something that you all recognize. I've heard that this was some cause for consternation for some of you. So let me go through a little bit about this. We'll go through the full answers at some point, but the intended solution was you would somehow exploit this via SQL injection over here in the queries. So if I did something like or 1 equals 1, something like that, right? You'll see this database error, and that should have been a pretty big hint that something's going wrong over here with the database, that you might be able to somehow exploit that. But anyways, you would do some sort of SQL injection over here. Some people also decide to do something like dirbuster, or some sort of buster. So I ran Ferox buster over here. You would have found that those are all the endpoints. There's docs, there's exports. And if you try to go to those endpoints directly, if you just skip the whole SQL injection, you have gotten something like here. So you have gotten most of the way in solving this homework problem. We'll get back to how we can forego potentially the whole SQL injection just by using dirbuster and everything to exploit the JWT token. But let's actually come back to SQL injection. Who liked trying all the different ways of doing SQL injection here? I don't see a lot of hands. And that's because it's painful. It's very, very painful. And so when there's something that's very painful and something that's clearly happens a lot in the real world, that should naturally come to you. Maybe someone's found a tool to automate this type of attack. Huh? There's a tool? Well, it turns out there is. So if we come to this thing, which is called SQL map, there is a automatic SQL injection and database takeover tool. So hopefully most of you didn't use SQL map, which is great because we didn't want you to understand the theory behind SQL and try things out on your own. But now we're getting to the point where hopefully you know how it works. And now we just have a tool that helps us, do this type of database takeover. Best thing about SQL map is it actually occurs as part of a Metasploit plugin. So we talked about Metasploit last Thursday.
Is it not also a Kali package?
I'm not sure if it's Kali package. I think you can download it separately, but it is part of Metasploit. So you can actually just load it directly into Metasploit and exploit that. So let me go through that for you. So if I come back to NMSF console, and hopefully it loads, you can do this, right? You can just load SQL map. SQL map is somewhere over here. So over here, SQL map plugin for Metasploit. In fact, there are a lot of different plugins that you might find useful in some of your upcoming assignments. Nessus is a well-known vulnerability scanner, for an example. There's a lot of other things that you can find in Metasploit, not just running payloads. Okay, so we're here. So load squeal map. All right, so successfully loaded squeal map. So let's see what we can do. What did I do?
Track of the number of times Ethan says squeal, I will give 1 jillion extra credit. Okay.
So how you use squeal map is you literally, as we found over here, you type in some query, and you can see that when it posts, it has this :search equals thing. So you can just copy this URL, paste it over here. And let's just try and see what happens when we do this. And it tells you, got the data, it did something, it didn't really work. Because you need to tell it what you want to do. So one of the things that you want to tell it is, I want to dump the whole database, if you can try to do that. And it'll try to tell you and says, okay, it just did it. You can write a request to /export over here. This is the thing that you were trying to find. Quite easy, isn't it? All this time spent doing SQL injection when we have a tool. Just put in the URL, tell it to dump the database. It'll try all the different things, different queries, and I'll just dump the whole database. So what's the lesson learned over here? Yes?
Work smart, not hard, but using SQ map.
Yes, work smart, not hard. Not just using SQL map, but my goal over here is we're going to go over a lot of tools, but there are a lot of tools in the real world. As I mentioned last Thursday already, you can use Metasploit to do a lot of payloads and stuff, but not every single payload is in Metasploit. Not every single tool is in Metasploit. There are other tools that are out there. They're just a Google search away. And a lot of doing security is just Googling and finding different tools that are out there. Now, I did mention that we can come back to the whole Buster thing, come back to export over here. And you can go and find out basically everything you need. You have the JWT token in there once you did the directory traversary and this export over here. All you were missing is basically a name. A lot of people got stuck because they didn't come back to the SQL injection until like very late. And they're like, okay, there must be some way to find some hidden stuff. But that's not necessarily the case. You didn't have to use SQL injection to find the person Earl. You could have just tried to directly, do something like dirbuster, gobuster, whatever, and try to put in all the different usernames you can possibly do in constructing a JWT token and see if it works. And it turns out there's a tool for that. So if you just Googled something like how do I brute force JWT tokens, you'll come back to something like over here that says JWT_tool. And it's very, very nice page. It has a whole wiki over here. It goes through all the different, it tries to attack any vulnerable JWT tokens. Yes?
How do you know that it's an actual tool and not somebody fishing for, somebody fishing at the actual JWT tool and then stealing all your data?
That's a great question. The question is, how do you know these tools are legitimate? And a lot of it is, that's why you run all these security things in a virtual machine. You don't try to, especially when you do attacks, right? You don't want to do them from your own machine. You always want to do them from some sandbox isolated machine because you don't know what might happen. Maybe the server itself that you're attacking might recognize something and try to send some payloads back to you. You never know that, which is also why you want to do them against authorized things. But if you come over here, it looks like a decent number of stars, a decent number of contributors. Looks like trusted, you can go audit the code. The whole code is just in this JWT_tool.py. You can go look through the code. if it's not exfiltrating your data, it should be fine in theory. But yeah, there's a tool like this. In fact, there's a whole wiki page somewhere over here that it's linked on this wiki page. And it even goes through very nicely what it can do. Using this JWT tool, all the different flags, it even goes through attack methodologies, finding public keys, stealing JWTs, and maybe that thing that says tampering and fuzzing might be helpful for the assignment that you just did. But my point again here is, we again are going to teach you some tools. You can use all the tools that we go over in class, and they will help you solve all the homework problems. But sometimes the better way is just go Google, find out what other tools are out there that we didn't cover, and hopefully you may find something that's very useful. In fact, most of the time you might. Any questions here?
Yeah, question. Can you go to cali.org/tools?
Okay, cali.org/tools.
See if any of the tools we just talked about, are they available in, well, there's a search bar.
Yeah, right here. Squeal map is over here.
What about is JWT tool on there? Or
I don't think it's on here.
I don't think it is.
Oh, here's the search bar. JWT.
Okay.
Doesn't look like that.
Maybe not. The really nice thing about Kali, as opposed to something just like a normal Ubuntu or insert Linux distribution here, is that the people maintaining Kali, they go through the process of finding random tools that are commonly used on GitHub, and they will do the hard work of making sure you don't have to be like, oh, I need to install this Python tool and then install like 500 different libraries that it uses using pip or stuff. They go through the hard work of bundling it into the app's package manager. So instead of GitHub and then you follow all the build instructions, you can just run something like app install SQL map, and then you can just run it SQL map instead of SQL map.py or whatnot. So Kali does provide some conveniences for, if the tool's on Kali, it's way more convenient to install it from Kali apps as opposed to just downloading off GitHub and then reading their wiki and see how it works. But it doesn't work for all packages, of course, so that's.
Why not just add Kali's PDA to your normal menus?
I mean, you can, but you run the.
All of this is tested on Kali, right? You know it will work out of the box. That's the thing, right?
If you want to upgrade your Debian into a Kali install, maybe, but I guess there's also like version incompatibilities with certain versions of software, and that's like a debate for a different day. But use at your own risk if you're a Linux user. Philosophy of Linux. Any more questions?
All right. Well, this page is actually perfect for transitioning to the next thing, which is the very first thing on the left over there that says hashcat. So hashcat, we briefly talked about also last, I think, Tuesday, about, or was it last Thursday? I can't remember. But anyways, when you type in passwords on your machine, they're not actually saved as default passwords like in plain text, because that would be grossly insecure. Instead, what will happen is your passwords get hashed, sometimes with this thing called salt, and that resulting string of characters gets saved into a database. So in the event that someone like Shiny Hunters comes in and steals all your information, your plain text password isn't exposed. So hashing algorithms take essentially an arbitrary length of string and then creates a fixed length output. And normally that's great, but the problem is if you just use a hashing algorithm, if someone also uses the same password as you, in fact, there are 37 students enrolled in this class, every single one of you has the default password Kali on our machines. If we use the same hashing algorithm, then the same hash should be shown on every single one of your machines. And so we will be able to correlate. If I use the same password as you do, then I also know what your password is. And so what happens is the operating system itself will actually add a string called assault. And so actually, let me just do this. /sc/shadow. Yeah, let's just open this. So this is what your shadow file looks like. Your shadow file basically tells you all the information about all the different users that have logins over here, what the hashed password and what the salt is. So if I zoom in, hopefully you can see this better. This over here is your hashed password. Actually, this whole thing is your hash password. This J9T is your salt. So every single user should have a different salt in your machine. So when you do a comparison, even if they have the same password, because that salt is also used in hashing the password, you get a different hash in the database. This first lecture or number tells you what hashing algorithm is being used to generate this password. So Y is, I believe, one of the newer algorithms, yes script, and that's what's being used to create this hash. Now there are older, more vulnerable hashing algorithms like MD5, that is $1. $5 is SHA-512, I think like $234 or some other algorithms. Now sometimes you might come to a realization that, wait a second, if I'm able to get the hash and I have the algorithm and all the salt, you might actually be able to reverse engineer by trying to brute force such a thing. And so that's when Hashcat comes into handy. So I will just come over here and generate a password. So if I do this, -1 again is MD5. I'm going to come to the Bitwarden and just generate a different password, copy this password. I'm going to use this very insecure 5-character password. It says estimated cracking time is 10 seconds. So let's see how it does on my computer. So again, we have resulting hash, $1 shows it's using the MD5 algorithm. This is the resulting hash. I'm going to copy this into hashes over here. So this was the hash that came from my random generation, and I'm going to come to, okay, hashcat.
This sounds like a quick understanding check. How comfortable is everyone with the idea of hashing algorithms? Is everyone comfortable with, how do we feel about the idea up, middle, down? With the strengths, weaknesses? We can do some more discussion.
We can talk about, but let's just run this because hopefully it doesn't take a lot of time. Anyway, so now it's going to crack this password. Let's actually talk more about this whole hashing and this whole hashcat, how it works. So again, hashing is a deterministic algorithm that takes a long string of numbers and reduces it to a fixed length string. So one of the more popular password hashing algorithms I think is like PBFDK or something like that. PBKDF2. So this is a password-based key derivation function 1 and 2. It looks something like this. So it has 5 input parameters, some pseudo-random function, the password, the salt, C, and the derived key length. And so these are the main 2 things. Everything else is constants that are known to the algorithm. And so it always generates this fixed length string. And that's what we see. Every single time you generate the same using the same algorithm, we have essentially the same output length. And the goal right now when we're doing this cracking exercise is all it's just trying to do is just trying to brute force all the different combinations. Hashcat is very advanced. There's a lot of things you can do. If I come to the wiki, and this is what I'm talking about tools, right? I'm going to talk about all these tools. There's another tool that can also do password recovery or password cracking called John the Ripper. Hashcat is newer. It supports GPU optimizations. Should be faster in theory. So the core attack modes, as you can see, is some dictionary attack. So if I have a giant word list, I can just try to use those word lists to churn through my password cracking algorithm and see if it matches the salt in the hash. Combinator attacks are concatenating words from multiple word lists, as it says. So if I'm using something like Bitwarden's passphrase generator, for an example, then I could use this combinator attack to say I take these known word lists, because Bitwarden is open source, we know what word list they're using. Then I can actually take all those different word lists, because now I have the salt, I can just directly create all the different hashes that it could possibly see if it matches. This brute force or mask attack is what the one that I'm trying to do is literally just says, try all the characters from a given character set, because I know that this is, only using A to Z 0 to 9. Maybe if I add special characters, then I'll also add that in. And then I can just brute force it. Brute force is the one that will take the longest, as the number of, password characters in your password increases, the harder it is, because it just takes exponential more time. So there's all these different types of attacks, and if you click into some of them, it'll tell you what the inputs are. So you can see all these masks, default mask, and it tells you how to use this. There's a lot of reading insecurity, unfortunately. That's why I've pre-computed this. Not pre-computed, but I ran this algorithm and looked through documentation before it came. And this password length increment tells you, like, if I know it's going to be at least 10 characters, I might start with 10 and do this increment to see how many characters I can go through. Okay, thanks, it's cracked it. So let's come over here. So by default, it's in the hashcat.plot file. Why is it just gone now? Where did it go? Okay, that is crazy. This file just disappeared from my computer.
You can just run the command again and do -- show.
No.
What? Hold on.
That's crazy. It says it's X. Is that where the...
Are you
Okay.
running it inside Kali or inside your...
It's inside my machine. So I was using the GPU of this. This is crazy. It was working. Oh, I know why. Because I updated hashcat. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, now I can do this. So as you can see, it thinks the password is MFKZE. Wait, that's not right. What happened? That was not supposed to happen. Didn't crack the password. That's crazy.
Could it have found collision or?
I don't think it found a collision. Should have worked. Why did it not work? Okay, let's run this again. Maybe it'll work this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Lowercase and uppercase. Oh, because I forgot to add digits over here. That's why it didn't work. Okay. So anyways, so what happened was I told it to just use upper and lowercase alphanumeric digits. Clearly there is a, upper and lowercase digit that was not alphanumeric, which was what this was using, and therefore it didn't crack the password. So it's very important that you know how the password is constructed. If you don't, then you actually have to brute force like every single combination, and it'll be taking a very, very long time. That's why, like, if you have like a 20-character password, it's basically uncrackable because no one knows what the parameters are, and if you have special characters, it's going to take a very, very long time to crack.
Wouldn't hashing this make it kind of like a faster way to do it? Or like you fix a few and then
Fix few what?
like iterate over through it instead of like doing the whole thing randomly, you just kind of like fix few at every portion and just like run it.
But you don't know, right? If I just made a new password and you have no idea how I made my password, then this is impossible, right? But if you know how the password is constructed, maybe everyone in your corporation uses Bitwarden, and they use this passphrase generator, and it always uses the same word list, the dash with another word. Then I can use hashcat to use the same word list and try to crack their passwords. Okay, hopefully this works this time. We'll see if it does.
But Ethan, if you know how the hash algorithm works and you have the hash, why can't we just,
Figure out how to reverse engineer the algorithm to get the password back from the hash. Okay, why can't we get the password back from the hash? That's a cryptography problem. Essentially, the algorithm is a trapdoor function, which means it's a one-way function where you take all this information and it condenses it down to this, fixed output. There's no way of reversing. Yeah.
Can you compare it to a modular operator?
Yeah, you can compare it to a modular operator. It's a lot more fancy mathematics that, if I have time, I'd love to explain it. But you can just assume it's a very complicated function. There's no way of reversing it. And there is literally no way of reversing it because of the pigeonhole principle. If you know what that is, there's infinite amount of input. There's a limited amount of output that it can get. So therefore, it's not a one-to-one mapping. And that's why some algorithms like MD5 and SHA-1 are vulnerable, because we know that the algorithm itself is subject to this thing called hash collisions. That means that we know it's very easy to take one known initial state with the corresponding hash and construct a different message that will also have the same hash. And that's not something we want in your password.
And that works because the only way the password is checked is they use a hash.
Exactly. Oh, the other thing about the salt, right? Why do we have a salt? It's to prevent against this thing called rainbow table attack. A rainbow table is if I don't have a salt and I only have the algorithm itself, again, we already know all the different possible passwords. Maybe I should start churning through all of these different alphanumeric combinations. And I'll just essentially get a huge database of all the potential outputs that this algorithm will produce. And so when I get a hash that has no salt, I can just look it up. So it's even constant time. I don't even have to try to crack passwords. I can pre-compute way ahead of time, maybe like 5 years prior, have this whole giant table and just match it. And that's why we have salt, to prevent against this type of attack. Okay.
And salt is just some random data that just gets added in.
Yes, salt is just some random data that gets added in. All right, any questions about Hashcat? Yes?
So you said salt is used to prevent this constant time lookup, but could you not just add a field when you're computing these hashes?
Right, yeah, you can try and add in every single possible salt there is. A good salt has around 256 to 512 bits. And again, if we remember the symmetric algorithm lecture, 256 or 512 bits is just impossible. It's more than the lifetime of the universe to compute all of these different combinations. And so that's why you want to choose a salt of that length.
I think, Bill, the answer to your question is, what's the purpose of having the salt if it's able to be looked up? It's just to prevent someone from using a non-salted lookup attack. I mean, if you can still brute force it with a salt. You just add it in to whatever password you're trying to brute force, and just do the computation. But the purpose of salt is to prevent rainbow tables, but it won't stop someone being like, I have your hash, let me try brute forcing it and running it for Hashcat.
As you can see, this, strangely enough, 5-character password is still taking forever on my computer. But if you have an industrial GPU, this is going to be in seconds. But yeah, any other questions so far? All right, well, we'll just keep that running, and we'll move on to the next topic that we have today. So this is basically where we'll stop for now about offense, which means we're going to be talking about defense now. What is cyber defense? It's the opposite of offense, obviously, but what do you do? What do you do in defense? How is it related to offense? Yes?
You find the hole or you patch it instead of you just...
You find the hole and you patch it instead of exploiting it. Okay, that's one interesting explanation. Any other suggestions? Yes?
You might also look at somebody who's already exploited the server and figure out how they did it.
Look at someone who's already exploited the server and see how they did it. Okay.
One more is
if you have a report that tells you from the offense team, which is what
Yes.
you said about the other, like the middle team, where
Yes.
they tell you there is this hole,
Mm-hmm.
and you just go like and fix that. Basically, that's another way.
Okay, just so what I'm hearing is just fix whatever the attacking team has found. That's cyber defense, right? So we should just hire teams of pen testers all the time, try breaking our stuff, and we just keep fixing them.
While there's an attack going on, cyber defense goes up to the hacker's house and shoots them.
Okay, hostage negotiation. I hear. Is part of cyber defense.
The military approach.
Make sure you do sudo app update every once in a blue moon.
Oh, do sudo app update once in a blue moon. Okay.
One more is they have access for the code, so they just kind of like look through it specifically. Maybe.
Look through code. Okay. Good ideas. We're getting there. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about in cyber defense is this idea of threat enumeration. So the big part of cyber defense is asking the question, what are our threats over here? What do we need to prevent against? And obviously, attackers is one thing. But there are a lot of different types of attackers. And the question that comes down to every organization is there's an infinite number of problems in your systems. Right? Every single day, new software comes out, new code gets written, and we have all these different software bugs. You can't patch everything. You can't, mitigate against every single possibility. 0 days, which is attacks that we've never seen before, exist as well. There's literally no way for us to even prevent all of the possible attacks. And so part of the defensive team is doing this thing called threat enumeration, figuring out what it is that we want to protect. And the idea we want to talk about is this thing called tactics, techniques, and procedures. So tactics refers to, I'm just going to quote the NIST definition, high-level descriptions of the method an adversary might use to formulate an attack. And so all this is like very theoretical for now. So the NIST definition, actually we have this over here. This is the NIST definition. High-level description of this behavior, techniques provides a more detailed description of the behavior, and procedures provide a lower-level, highly detailed description of the behavior in the context of the technique. So the idea is just basically, when we're the defensive team, we need to know the adversaries better than they would know us. The only way that someone else can exploit us is if they know something that we don't. Unless you know something, you decide not to do anything about that. But let's just pretend that we're all reasonable people. If we know something's broken, we're going to fix it. So our job is to know our own systems better than an attacker would. And the attacker's job is, of course, to know our systems better than we know. Very easy. And you would think that we have the upper hand over here. After all, these are our systems. We have direct access to them. Why would we not know our systems better than everyone else? Yes?
Codes are not written by like one person to actually have the whole validation thing. Second thing is the whole team, like not everybody is as experienced to actually detect the vulnerabilities to begin with.
Okay.
And the third one would be is the code that is pre-written before you come in as an employer. It might have vulnerabilities.
Okay.
Just this assumption basically in this case.
Okay.
Like assume it's safe, but it's not.
Okay, so you're talking about this in the terms of code context. Like if we're running some software, we don't know what the software is doing. Therefore, an adversary might know the software better than we do. Okay, that's a valid point. We'll get to that. Yes.
There's a 1% chance that it's live coded in some first environment variables.
Okay, so we're talking about all of this in terms of code or software. But we're not even there yet. So let's actually take a bigger look at the whole picture in terms of our entire system. Our entire system is networked together. So actually the first thing that we want to prevent is any network attacks. Not even talk about like softwares that hidden behind servers. Let's just look at the entire network in general. There are a lot of different problems with networks. there could be devices that get spawned up. For example, every single time you open your laptop, connect to the Wi-Fi, that's a new thing added to the network, a new potential vector of attack.
Also,
Do you think do you think whoever managed the server, whoever managed the security team, knows exactly when you did that? No, they don't. They obviously, there's like millions of devices connected. How do they know what device is connected to you at any given moment? It's impossible, right? So it's not as easy as, oh, I can just look at code. We not even need to look at code. Just looking at the network standpoint, we're already at a disadvantage here.
actually, there's also the user's issue, where like if
Okay.
the user screw up, then it's a vulnerability you cannot really avoid unless you prevent them from
So
doing things.
that's actually a great point. Human behavior is undeterministic. It's a whole different conversation that we have in the security world about how we mitigate against these things. So there's, of course, unintentional user behavior, right? Maybe the user just accidentally screws up, right? Makes a weak password, randomly approves their dual login, all sorts of things. They click on a virus and they download the virus onto a server. All this could happen. And that's not even talking about this thing called insider threat, where someone is in your organization and deliberately tries to attack you. So all of this is a big problem in terms of doing the defense. So anyways, let's actually come back to this whole idea of tactics, threats, tactics, techniques, and procedures. So we also have to talk about this thing called risk. So a lot of defense is using this word. How risky is it to do something? And risk is actually a very easy equation. It's just threats multiplied by your vulnerabilities. So what's the risk to any organization? Who can give me a number about threats? Who can give me a number for vulnerabilities? Infinity. Wow, we have infinite amount of risk in this organization. So doing anything, like doing any security, is no different than doing no security. Is that what you're telling me?
No, like if you're going with the assumption of there is always new threats, like just
Right.
the ones that you know, then you cannot like bound it to a certain number.
Okay.
Plus the vulnerabilities is the same as which
Is the number of
why-
vulnerabilities the same though?
Because updates is what.
But at any given moment, like the question is, how big is a particular vulnerability and how big is that threat? For example, the having a 0 day on a server, for example, it's a very vulnerable thing, but the likelihood of that threat happening is very low because 0 days just don't pop out of nowhere. They take a lot of time and investment to even find out. So the vulnerability.
Hold up. Has everyone heard the term 0 day before? Well, who has not heard the term 0 day before?
Oh, okay. So 0 day is this idea that there's an exploit that has never before seen in this world before. So, for example,
Say the NSA installed a backdoor into like every one of our computers, or has a way of getting it.
yeah. So there are a lot of known exploits out of the world, right? That's the whole point of the CVE, or Common Vulnerability and Exposure Database, right? These are known attacks. And that's why we want to patch against them. But sometimes, once in the blue moon, there might be an attacker, some sort of state-sponsored actor, for example, that spent years researching computer vulnerabilities, and they find this very particular way of exploiting a computer that no one knows about. That's a 0 day. There's no way of preventing against this because no one knows about it.
Is that similar to the one that they had more like, not a security thing, but I think they had something for like the hardware loophole into PS5 or something, where there was like literally a vulnerability within the system itself, so they could just like
PS5, that's up your alley.
PS5. I don't own consoles.
No, like I heard they have like one in the hardware itself where
Well, I guess the idea is any vulnerability before it is made public is a 0 day. So no one knows about it, but you could be exploited by it. I mean, look at if you are semi-active in our Discord server, you might know that a bunch of Linux vulnerabilities that allow you to instantly get root on systems just dropped the past few weeks. They've been there for like years, but no one not a lot of people knew about them until now, and before they were made public as a 0 day.
Oh, okay.
You can't, I guess the idea is you can't defend against things you don't know about.
But there's a lot of things that we know about, and that's what we're trying to defend. So in cyber defense, when we're talking about defending against things, we're defending against known vulnerabilities here. Okay? And so we come back to this equation over here. How likely is something to damage us, right? If this is some known vulnerability that everyone has access to, right? That's public, that's been public for years, right? Then the threat to us is very high, right? And therefore the risk of doing something like that is high. But when you're saying that even though, you know, the vulnerability, like some sort of magical 0 day that would just completely break our systems, is very high, the likelihood that threat is very low. And so then the corresponding risk should also be very low, right? So you have to assign these, you know, sort of like numerical values, somehow like tell you how big some risk is. And this is what, you know, is commonly known as risk assessment, like trying to figure out, because it's hard to quantify any of these things, to figure out what the threats and what the vulnerabilities are.
You know, everyone has different computers. How can you say this threat is worse to my computer versus yours? I mean, it's all relative and kind of vibe based.
All right. So the next thing that we should talk about is, again, threats. Threats to us. So there are 3 different types of threat agents that we commonly think about. First type is what we call opportunistic, right? If you have some website that just, you know, displays a shell that you can just, you know, open up and just type commands into, and you can just, you know, somehow get root access. Very easy way to do something. Anyone can just come along to your website and be like, "Ooh, this looks interesting. I don't even need to know. Maybe my intention wasn't to try and break into it, but you just have this, you know, giant hole in your system. I'm just here per chance, and I'm just gonna go, you know, break your system."
Yeah, like
That's an opportunistic hacker.
Yeah, like
Okay.
leaving an unlocked car in the middle of, I don't know, Oakland.
Yeah. Like leaving an unlocked car in the middle of Oakland, for example. Opportunistic. Maybe someone wasn't looking to attack you in specific, but if they're just scanning the whole web and they just find you have a like giant open door, they're just gonna hack you. Obviously, this is the type of attack that we definitely want to prevent. This is what we call low-hanging fruit. You know, just try and remove this kind of attacker. Second type of threat actor that we see is organized cybercrime. Okay, we should be all familiar with this.
Intentional.
So their whole purpose is to try and break things. It's not particularly sophisticated ways, so things you can think of like social engineering or things called script kiddies. Like you can just find scripts online, you know, which is what a lot of you are doing or should be doing for the homework. Find scripts online, attack and execute them. This is usually a lot of what organized cybercrime does. Third type is what we call APT.
Best way to get into prison.
Advanced Persistent Threat. What?
It's like best way to get into prison.
Best way to get into prison. If you're part of an APT, you're unlikely to get into prison, in fact. So APT is usually nation-state-sponsored cyber attacks. So these organizations have an incredible amount of resources. And because they're state-backed, very unlikely to get into prison, in fact. This is likely to get in prison. This is very, very likely to get in prison because probably very easy to find out who did that.
I mean,
Yes.
If you're in an APT, I guess like you're less likely to get in prison, but you're also more likely to bomb a window.
It depends.
in a certain Eastern European country, maybe, but we'll leave that for it. I mean, has everyone here remember what happened with XZ? Everyone watched the very tasking video. It's like, oh yeah, we nearly blew up Linux because some guy named Jiaotan inserted some funny GitHub commits. Everyone remember that story? Anyone not heard of that story?
Who hasn't heard of XZ? Okay. I guess I'll go over what XZ
Okay,
is.
required watching 1 hour Veritasium video.
So XZ, so there's this program on your computer called XZ Utils. Okay, hopefully this has cracked it. Let's actually come and check this. Oh, okay, it worked. So $1 that thinks it's cracked it, KZN3X. Oh, I closed it, but that was the password that we generated. So it did crack the password. All right, that's the end of hashtag now. Okay, so.
ECS198F
Huh?
on CSIF?
No, this is not CSIF. That has nothing to do with CSIF. Don't worry.
I'll bug you about it later. Sorry.
Okay, so there's this program on your computer called XZ. it's a compression utilitary. So it just compresses files, basically. It's like zip, it's like gzip, all that. So it's a very lightweight, it's highly effective, so it compresses it down to by a lot. And it comes standard in a lot of Linux distributions. Okay? And so someone found that, wait, if I can compromise this utility, then I would be able to somehow gain access to a lot of Linux servers. And so someone spent 3 years, well, we say someone, but it's likely a group of hackers, an advanced persistent threat, someone backed by a nation state, who meticulously essentially bombarded the original maintainer, because this is an open source utility, into giving them control of the library itself. So now they have essentially unlimited write access to the repository. Then they snuck in a essentially a vulnerable binary masked as some random bits. So in order to test how effective these, whether there are any bugs with this utility, what they do is they just upload random binary files onto the GitHub, and they run tests against them. And so they disguise their payload as this random, bits uploaded to GitHub. And then it went packaged into every other Linux distribution. And then they were able to use this vulnerability in XZ in the Linux kernel to essentially get root SSH privileges on all Linux machines.
So they backdoored everyone's SSH.
Exactly, through this. The short story is they somehow got backdoor root access into all Linux machines. Nearly. Okay, so what happened in the end and why we know about this is because obviously someone found out about it. And how someone found out is there was this random Microsoft employee who was testing the latest Linux distributions to see if they can even update. Because we'll talk about why we want to do updates later and why we might not want to do updates. But they were looking at to see if this update was compatible with their server. And he realized that for some reason SSH was taking just slightly more time than usual. And he was like, this is interesting, this is weird, I'm gonna go investigate. And he traced all the way back to XZ and found that, wait a second, there's this very interesting payload that keeps getting loaded onto my machine, and it turns out it's just an extra private key, extra public key on my SSH box, so now I can just, whoever controls the corresponding private key, which is whoever made this, loophole in XZ, would be able to just SSH into all the machines. And because this was before this Linux distribution got put into mainstream, that's why engineers are testing it. That's how we figured this out. But if you didn't go trace that, like, whatever, it takes an extra 2 seconds for my SSH to work, we would never have known, and maybe all our computers would be backdoored today.
The whole point of this story is APTs are very sophisticated that can, sink a lot of money and time and resources into like coordinated gaslighting or spend time working on the Linux kernel to gain trust. Or, very
These are very sophisticated attackers. They know what they're doing, and they have a long time frame to try and execute these types of attacks. Okay? There's another story about this, about like a nation state-backed attacks against Iran and their nuclear program, in fact. I forgot what the name was. Stuxnet, there we go, huh?
The one where they slow down the fans in a bunch of states.
Yeah, so they have these nuclear plants where there's these things called centrifuges that spin and enrich uranium, essentially. And these centrifuges have to be in this precise calibration of how fast they spin. And how they attacked is with someone essentially snuck in a USB, so insider threat, right? Someone took a USB because this whole area is obviously air-gapped from the internet, so there's no way of reaching it. So someone snuck in the USB with this payload, put it in the machine, exploited the machines, and essentially spun the centrifuges faster and slower, all while telling the monitoring machines that everything's normal. And it was so sophisticated, in fact, that the only reason we found out about it is because some engineer essentially, because this payload itself, you just insert it into one computer, it's going to be on that computer. It's a worm that would just go through every single computer in the network and only infect this very specific controller that controlled this machine. If it's not that, it won't infect it. It will just keep passing the payload. So at some point, that payload got into some engineer's computer. That engineer took his computer back home, and so connected to the internet. Then the worm just spread everywhere. And at some point, someone realized, wait a second, there's this worm that's just doing nothing. What is the whole point of this? Then they deconstructed the whole packet, the whole payload, and found out that it only targeted this one very specific centrifuge machine. And so that's why it was undetected for years. And so this is, again, usually when we deal with APTs, it's a very targeted attack against some very targeted organizations or targeted individuals.
I mean, who can guess who has an interest in, I don't know, blowing up Iranian nuclear facilities?
We're not going to talk about this. No politics in here.
Well, we know. Well, it's
the worm on the centrifuge machine is what I want.
well. I guess the point is that
A computer worm. So a computer worm is just something that constantly hops between machines.
Wasn't there one that targeted like I forgot what it was called, but it was like encrypts the whole computer files and then like if the language doesn't like if it has only English and like right?
WannaCry.
WannaCry, yes.
Yes,
Is it-
ransomware attacks, yes.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between worm and viruses, but we're far removed from our original topic here.
Okay.
Let's come back to risk, okay? So again, so the whole point of these stories are to talk about this idea of risk, okay? APTs, highly risky things, not risky, highly vulnerable things, huge threats, but the likelihood of a regular organization getting hit by an APT is supremely low, right? They only target either like wide, things like the Linux kernel, or they target nation state, like Iran's nuclear program, right? This is what APT does. Big scope. If you're just a normal, regular business, this is not something that you're likely to have to worry about. Organized cybercrime, maybe, right? So this is a question mark. You might want to think about how we prevent organized cybercrime. Opportunistic is something that we should all be preventing, right? This is the key thing that we want to do. This is easy to attack, which means we should definitely defend against this. So once we defend against this, then we look at what we can do about organized cybercrime. Is that clear? Okay. So now the question is, how do we do this? How do we prevent against attacks? And yes, we've talked a lot about that. Let's attack our machines, patch all the holes, but there are infinite amount of holes, so what do we do? Well, the good thing is, as part of defensive practitioners, we have other tools in our tool belt that we can do to prevent these types of attacks. And there is this idea called defense in depth. Who has heard about that? No one's heard of defense in depth. Okay.
anyone want to throw out any ideas of what it sounds like?
When you're in Arab computing case, you see a threat, then they switch.
What'd you say?
As in, if you see a threat, wipe all the files off your computer.
Wipe all the files. Okay.
Bro, I would have lost my computer like 5 times over if that was the case.
That's why I said-
Okay. Perfect.
Defense, well, let's write it out. DEPTH. Yeah.
So defense in depth is also called sometimes the Swiss cheese model.
Wait, defense is death. I thought you said defense is death.
now that we've written it out, let's yeah.
My bad.
Makes sense in that case.
Defense in depth, or Swiss cheese model. Want to guess what this means?
Anyone follow plane crashes? Well, not plane crashes, but
Huh?
here's
What? So Swiss cheese, this is not Swiss cheese, but usually have holes in them.
Yeah.
now it's
Okay. So now, all of these Swiss cheeses have different holes, and just like our applications and everything, there are a bunch of different holes in them. We may know about them, and we may not know about them. But if our applications have many of these layers are all the way over here, and they don't line up, like we hit this hole, some attacker comes in, comes over here, and they're stopped over here, we're good. So the idea of defense in depth is we have multiple layers of security, multiple layers of redundancies to prevent them from ever coming close to our machines. Okay? Individual layers have holes, but when you stack them all together, they should be prevented. Is that clear? that's the idea of defense in depth. How do we implement defense in depth? What's the first layer that we should talk about? We already talked about this. What's the first layer that we always consider? Network. Perfect. Network is the most important thing we want to do. If we can close as many holes over here on the network layer, then the lower layers, like the application level, hopefully this has blocked most of the things. But the first thing we want to talk about is network. And we'll actually have a whole lecture just to dedicate to network over here. But what is part of the network? Machines is part of the network. What else is there?
Websites, servers.
Servers, OK. So all of these we want to prevent, but we want to have something to block off unauthorized access to even come to the network. This thing is called, hopefully you've heard of this, a firewall. So individually on all your machines, you might have a firewall. But when you even come into access to the network, we have a network level firewall to prevent this type of access, right? So this is the first layer of defense. Then we have other layers of defense in the network as well. Then we move on to the next level. So maybe on your server, you have some other protections. And then at some point on your applications and on your computers, you also have maybe individual firewalls to prevent more access. This is the whole idea of defense in depth, preventing different types of attack layer by layer by layer. OK. So as I said, we'll have lectures about network and all these layers. So let's fast forward to this last layer over here. On your own machine, if we're doing defense, what can we look at? What tools do we have on our Linux machines? We've talked about that as well.
You were mentioning it a bit.
So it's still, we can still talk about networks, right? Like we can see what kind of connections come into your machines, what things go out of your machines, right? We have things like, oh, every single time you do an attack.
There's the individual firewall for every device.
Okay,
That
yes.
is one. The antiviruses.
Antiviruses, yes. Microsoft Defender, yes.
Surprisingly good.
It is surprisingly good. It's gotten a lot better in recent years. Yes.
Like here, and it's like Nmap is like you can use it to figure out what ports are open.
Okay, you can figure out what ports are open per machine, yes. Nmap, yes. But if you have access, and again, we're the defender, so we actually have access to these
I think
machines.
there is also the user login thing. If you want to verify that the person that's logging in should have access.
Okay.
If somebody does something, then you kind of like record that
Okay.
this person is the one that did the action.
Yes.
Just physical cybersecurity at this point, but I don't know.
Okay. So the idea is actually, okay. What's going on? Oh, here, okay. So we actually have access to these machines as the defender. If you're the attacker, you shouldn't have access to these machines. So there's actually a lot of things we can do to secure machines themselves that I'll quickly talk about. So there's things like SS or netstat that we've talked about. SS tells us exactly what's going on in your machines. We may have covered this in the very first couple of lectures. This command tells you, like ss-plnt, hopefully this works. Right, it tells you all the different things that are running that are sending traffic across the network on this particular machine. So if we can look at all these systems and we run some sort of detection software that tells us what's going on over here, we might be able to figure out what's going on. Another thing that might be helpful is this thing called systemctl. So systemctl tells you all the different services that are running on your machine. You figure out, if there's any unauthorized services, something like a backdoor. If you execute, a payload through Metasploit, it should show up, on your systemctl and tell you exactly what's going on.
This might be a little bit off the scope, but do they do track the WireGuard? I think it was when we use it, where you track the signals and packets that's going in and out to make sure there is no like the one we did last week where you establish a connection as being the shell or something.
Yes. So we should be able to see from, so let's go back to what we did last week. I essentially initiate some sort of tunnel from outside the network into the machine and put a payload in so it would keep talking to my machine that's outside the network over here, right? So clearly there was a bunch of holes that went through over here. So the first question is, did your firewall or did the network level see this connection? And the answer is they should be seeing this connection, and they should be like, is this an authorized action? And if they think it is, then you move to the next level. Right? And all the way down to this user level over here, your machine itself should also realize, it will know, right? All of us should know, right? If you have some sort of monitoring device, the network knows something's going on. Your device itself will also have in systemctl or in sort of SSPLNT or in netstat or on your process, your PS ops, it will tell you there's this process running. So the question comes down to, do you as a security engineer know what's going on? Again, does the adversary know you better than you know in your own systems? Right? If you know what's the normal status of your systems and you see abnormal things going on, that's the cue for you to investigate. But if you don't even know what's normal in your own systems, then you don't know what abnormal looks like.
Yeah.
So if you know, normally, I have 5,000 processes running on this server. And normally, I only have, port 18, port 443 connections, for example. Then that's my normal behavior. And when something like this happens, you should see there's a random new connection happening on port 8080, for example. That's abnormal behavior, and that means you should be investigating. But again, it comes down to, do you know your own systems better than the adversary? The answer is usually not. But that's what our goal here. Our goal is to get to that level.
The adversary does investigate it. What are the odds of you investigating to that level to begin with?
In this analogy, bad actors can't just punch a hole inside a layer of cheese, right?
Correct. We're assuming they can't just punch a hole in the layer of cheese.
What if that there's like the back way hacking where like they send it as a package and then like they bug in the system or something, like plant it? Virus or something?
They plant. So again, we usually think about the Swiss cheese model from someone entering from outside. We can always go out, right? Everything needs to be able to talk out. So if we're able to somehow get the server itself to talk out, all of this is, problematic. So we need to even prevent the server from having to do that in the first place. Okay, so aside from all of this, systemctl, we also have things like journalctl. Journalctl is a logging thing. It tells you exactly what's going on and logs all the data that happens in your system. It should also exist on like /var/log. So on a Linux system, you can see there are all these different logs that happen when you do something, like especially when you elevate to super user privileges, root privileges, network things, it gets logged. Where's this log? Sometimes this log is running, sometimes it's not. I guess it's not. Oh, here's journal. So journal is what we're looking at. So journalctl logs all the relevant like login information. So if some other person other than yourself logs into your system, you should be able to find that in the logs. And that brings us to something over here called intrusion detection system and an intrusion prevention system. So intrusion detection system is, by reading the logs, it sees abnormal behavior. Again, it needs to know what normal behavior is, and it's a tool that will tell you, wait, I think I'm detecting, which is the D, abnormal behavior. You should go investigate. IPS is prevention system. It looks at the logs and tells you, oh, I think there's something abnormal going on. I'm not even going to tell you. I'm just going to prevent it in the first place. So there's these two things that usually runs on all these different systems, which we usually call antivirus systems. But they're actually two different things. So now the question is, why do we want IDS or IPS? Why not, if we can detect something, why don't we just prevent everything? Yes?
Some files, it's like, I don't know if that is actually part of it. Like sometimes if you get files that doesn't have the full security on them, the system will just take them out.
The system will just take them out.
It's like the prevention one will just kind of like delete like if it's an antivirus, you'll have like a document or something.
Uh-huh.
If you do your own code or something, you don't have a license agreement on it or whatever.
Okay.
You just run it, the system will inspect it as a virus and it's just gone.
Okay, you're essentially getting it right. So then intrusion prevention system is a very restrictive thing, right? If you do something that if we don't have IDS, everything we detect we just prevent, what will happen is you just get blocked from doing normal activity. Because sometimes normal activity looks abnormal. And maybe day to day you just keep browsing the web, and one day you're like, oh, I want to learn to be a programmer. So now I'm going to download some code, and I'm going to try to write some code. Now it looks abnormal behavior because you've never done that before. And if we just look at abnormal behavior and be like, okay, it's abnormal, we're going to prevent you. You're never going to learn how to code now.
That's why your program doesn't work.
That's why your program doesn't work. So that's why we don't want IPS only. We want to have a detection system that will tell someone, either you or some security engineer, that something abnormal is happening. But abnormal itself doesn't mean it's malicious behavior. Abnormal is just abnormal. Okay, so there's normal, abnormal, and abnormal, there's expected abnormal behavior, and unexpected, usually malicious abnormal behavior. That's how we have both.
I will add that even though it's harder to do intrusion prevention, it doesn't mean that it's completely useless. It just means you just have to be very judicious and careful when you say, I want to block people from doing this thing. Well, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced like school Chromebooks. They block websites you actually might need to use.
Cool math.
Exactly.
They block research sites but allow game sites.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you gotta be careful if you want to say you are banned from doing stuff.
Okay, so coming back to IDS and IPS, the interesting thing is as a defender, everything is usually logged. So all you need to do is just inspect the logs enough and you'll find out whether or not you're being attacked or not. It's very easy thing to do. In fact, we know that because you might have seen headlines saying like, this company just got breached. In fact, the attackers were in their system for 9 months. What does that tell you? That tells you that at some point, they figured out that they were being attacked. And then they went and investigated, and they found out that they got in 9 months ago. And the only reason they know that they got in 9 months ago is because of logs. Okay, so a lot of cyber attacks actually, everything is logged, right? When something comes in the network, when something attacks the machine, it's all logged, it's in the centralized logging server. So the question is just, can we effectively utilize the logs that we have and do something about them? And it turns out it's a very difficult thing, and that's why people get hacked all the time. So the important thing is, again, everything is logged. Question is just, do you know how to use the logs to your advantage? You had something to say?
I was gonna ask, it seems like the logs really help, after you've been first hacked, and you also know that you're hacked. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what to search in the logs.
Yes. So that's why there are a lot of new systems. When we talk about IPS and IDS, they have these things called attack signatures. So they look at known ways of attacking your system, and there is a signature that usually comes with a payload, for example. And they take that signature and compare it to a database. If something's going on, something's coming into your computer, match the database, and it's going to be like, oh, well, that's probably an attack. And therefore, from the logs, they'll be like, let's prevent that from happening, or let's at least alert someone. So that's the important thing. And sometimes if it's some new thing or your system isn't configured to handle some of these things, it will still show up in the log, you just didn't do anything about it. So what's the takeaway over here about doing defense? About doing defense is there's a lot of ways to be attacked. We want to implement this thing called defense in depth. We'll talk about how we do networks security. We'll talk about how to do application security and all these different things. But the idea is we want to put in as many layers as we can from the attacker all the way down to our machine and secure and fortify every single layer so that there's as few holes as possible and that the holes don't magically line up. And so our systems will end up being defended. Ways that we can do that on the application level is look through logs, see if you're being attacked, using automated tools like intrusion detection systems or intrusion prevention systems to figure out if that's something that is going on. And we come back, again, to the idea of risk. Anything that you do in security is costly, right? That's why we don't have 500 security members for every single machine. That's just not feasible. We've asked the question about how big a vulnerability and how big the threat is in order to make the determination what kind of security needs to be applied, right? Every single machine is different. A server that contains all your password and social security numbers is obviously a bigger threat to being leaked than a random web server. And so we want to protect and put more resources on that versus on something else. That means on the defender side, you might want to implement additional security layers on that particular machine, because if everyone has your hashes, we can run it through Hashcat and gain access through another medium. Any questions for this lecture? Yes.
How are log files themselves protected? Because if that's the trail that the attacker leaves, wouldn't you be really worried that they're gonna try to delete it or alternate it or?
That's a perfect question. Log files on random systems, like if you have root privileges, you can just delete them. You're absolutely correct. And so therefore, a lot of times in our networks, we actually have a dedicated central logging system. And so you will configure something that runs periodically on your system to send all the logs to the centralized logging system. And the centralized logging system will only append logs, so you will never be able to overwrite anything. And so this is also so there are a couple of things in your network that's highly sensitive and must be protected. Logging system is one of them. Your authentication server is one of them. Any database that contains, again, like social security numbers or what we call personally identifiable information. Those are what we call high threat systems, very, very risky. No matter what kind of vulnerabilities that might exist, they're very, very risky, and so therefore they must have the maximum amount of protection on them.
I don't know if this applies for it, but logs are for every instance, basically. So how would the defender know if the hacker just deleted the log from the system? How would he know from the thing that you just talked about if there's hundreds of thousands of logs in there?
So you mean if I delete the logs on the system?
And then you just have that system you talked about that appends logs. How would the defender know that somebody hacked if there's hundreds of thousands of logs?
So the logs keep getting forwarded over here, right? So even your deletion action itself will also be logged, actually. So at some point, it will get forwarded to this centralized server.
Well, if you're gonna be checking it back, let's say I did my action and then I lived 6 months before you figure out that I logged it there and I deleted my thing. How many logs will be there for you to detect?
Okay, so how many logs are in the centralized logging server? So a little bit of inside information. Some organization, like health organization for hospitals, they generate around 30 terabytes of logs per day.
So yeah, how would you know as a defender that?
So therefore, we as defenders rarely go and peek at logs every single line individually, unless we're doing some sort of forensic investigation. Instead, what we rely is, again, on automated tools. We don't, go and code everything ourselves. We don't, find new vulnerabilities. We rely on these things called tools that will go and automatically scan the logs to see what's going on. If there's, something that says, oh, someone tried to delete logs, for example, your tool will hopefully tell you this is something that you should look at. And so your tools should inform you about what logs are important enough. And again, from the attacker standpoint, that means you want to do something that would escape the tool's capabilities. And so it's always going to be a fight from the defender's standpoint or the attacker standpoint. The attacker will always try to evade tools, and the defenders will always try to upgrade their tools to mitigate against all these different types of evasiveness.
I agree. It was just because it's tedious to kind of backtrack logs that would be impossible for a human to do. That was why I was asking.
Okay. I forgot how you...
Question.
Huh?
No, I was just saying good question.
Okay. So I forgot how you do this, but there's this thing called cron that's running on all Linux machines. Cron is this thing that periodically executes some commands.
Who here uses a Windows computer? Everyone heard of Task Scheduler? Well, if you haven't pulled up right now, you'll see that same idea. It runs things periodically, Chrome updater when you start up. You can use it to troll your friends. Ask me how I know.
So the idea is when we talk about this whole, let's create a backdoor into your machine and create a shell. This is only temporarily. So if I rebooted my machine, my connection will be lost. And so one thing that an attacker would usually do is add something to their cron tab or add something to task scheduler so that periodically it will check if this process is running or not. And if it's not, like someone rebooted their machine, then we'll just launch that back up. So I will always have a connection to my machine. So cron is something that you want to check, again, task manager, task scheduler on Windows, and see, this is one of the easiest way to check if something's going on your computer, on your servers, is look at your cron tab, see if there's something that says, wait a second, why is it telling me every single hour, go and talk to this other server and try and launch a reverse shell back to it. That might be an indicator that you're compromised in some way, and you might want to go and investigate that.
I'm gonna look into that in a second.
And so that's also why, like, when you have something running and you think something's broken, an easy way again is just shut down and reboot the whole thing, because it clears a lot of active connections, refreshes everything, brings you back to a new state. Any other questions?
Wait, how did you build a cron task?
I forgot how you do that. -L?
Yeah. I mean, -E is edit. I don't know what L does.
Oh, okay, here we go. Okay, so let's do -E. So this is a cron tab, but that's how you do it.
I can't see this.
There are comments. There's nothing in the file except just.
Yeah, right now these are all just comments here.
If you try highlighting it.
I mean, yeah.
Okay, so this is what cron tab tells you. So for example, this is the end of the file. There's nothing else. So you have other lines over here that tell you something like this. So you can run a backup of all your user accounts at 5 a.m. every week with this command. And it does something like this. So if your cron tab in your file has something that says like every single hour, 0001, I think that means this is.
It's like the format is weird. This is like run it. You can provide concrete values for minute, hour, day of month, and day of week. So minute would be. This is like at 5.
Yeah,
when
it's
the
at
minute
5
reads 5. If you want to make it like every 5 minutes, you have to do like some divisible by 5 stuff.
Yeah.
It's you can read the syntax online, but the idea is you can specify stuff to run periodically or at specific times. For example, this runs literally the command tar zdf, etc.
Also really good to do like updates.
So yeah, so if I did 0 ****, that would be like at the 0th minute at every single hour, because that's what happens. Then it'll just run. So at every single hour, I'll just run this random command that might just give me a reverse shell. So some attacker might do that, put it in the cron tab, go inspect your cron tabs, maybe we'll find that. Any other questions? All right. Well,
we talked about the attacks itself. But
Yes.
we didn't- Like, are we gonna cover like at all like viruses, which is basically kind of like planted or whatever that is?
we might in the future. But in terms of offense, at this point, like you're good to do homework. Was it 4? Homework 4 is all good. When we talk about defense, homework 5 will be about defense. It's going to be very, very fun. You'll get to have a little taste of how bad doing defense is. And homework 6 might have something to do with all of this on the attack side.
No, I'm just curious because like it's also part of the attack actually planting a virus or something or not? Isn't it?
If you have, so the thing is, if you have a shell over here, and you're able to put viruses on your computers, at that point you're asking, how do we do digital forensic, right? Once you get attacked, then it's called incident response and digital forensics. And that's a whole separate thing in cybersecurity. So there's defense, so that's even preventing attacks from happening. There's offense, which is attacking. And there's digital forensics, which is after you've got attacked and all of that, how do you go and clean up your whole system? How do you do a deep clean, right? Like whole canvas thing.
That's why I'm asking.
Right?
'Cause, like, how do you defend from that? Because like if you don't.
Once you get attacked, that's the end of defense. So defending is no longer applicable. The easiest way to defend is just cut yourself off from the network, which is what Canvas did, right? That's how they brought the whole system down, and they brought in expert forensic people. Because again, defense is just preventing you from coming in. Once you're in your home and the attacker is messing up your home, that's no longer the defensive job. The defensive job is the security guard at at the door and at the windows and at other leaky places and to prevent them from coming in. Once they're in, that's a whole different ballgame. And it's no longer our job as defenders to do that. It's called, again, forensics, who comes in and cleans everything.
Maybe security guards not the best analogy. Like bars on a door, like the locks. The locks, their job essentially, it's not their job to stop people from, like, I don't know, smashing your trash in your house. That's a closer analogy.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. That's the end of lecture 13.